Across the scorched plains of Texas, where even a horse's hoofbeat carried the scent of defiance, an old farmer stood before a crowd of hundreds and made a bold wager. No one alive could tame his wild black Mustang. The crowd laughed, until a strange young woman stepped forward. No reins, no saddle, no threats, just a steady gaze and an old song. What happened next left all of America speechless. The wind whipped harshly across the sun-scorched land of the Texas Panhandle, lifting dust in thin, tired waves, like even the earth itself had grown weary of this never-ending summer. Beneath a weathered wooden fence, Cliff Redmond stood still, gripping the rim of his frayed cowboy hat, eyes fixed on the black horse standing silent in the corral. That horse, Midnight Dust, was tall, powerful, and wholly untamable. Its coat was pitch black, like a slice of midnight sky with no moon, save for a faint white streak that ran from its forehead down to the bridge of its nose, like a scar left by lightning. It didn't buck, didn't rear, didn't thrash. It just stood there, eerily still, as if waiting for someone worthy to speak its name. Cliff slowly chewed on a wad of tobacco. The bitter taste clung to his teeth, but it couldn't mask the sting rising in his throat. 4 trainers had already been thrown from that horse's back. One had cracked ribs. Another needed a dozen stitches in the face. None had lasted more than 10 seconds. The local press, they called Midnight Dust the nightmare of the high plains. "Boss, that horse is gonna kill someone," came Wyatt's voice from behind, gravelly from too many cigarettes and too much wind. He'd been managing the ranch for years. "I've seen some mean ones, but I've never seen a look in a horse's eye like that." Cliff didn't turn. That's the look of a warhorse, not a pet. Wyatt fell silent. He knew Cliff well enough to understand. To the old rancher, a horse's defiance wasn't just a training issue. It was an insult to his pride. Cliff limped away from the fence, his left knee aching from a long-ago break that never healed right. He made his way toward the main house, a creaky wooden home sitting on 500 acres of dust and memory. He had lived there for over 40 years, most of them with his late wife. Her photo still sat on the table by the window, eyes soft, always watching when he entered the room. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, settled into the cracked leather chair by the window, and stared out across the yard. The horse corral stood silent, with the black figure inside it like a ghost cut from storm clouds. A distant engine roared. A dusty blue Ford pulled into the lot. Ryan, Cliff's only son, stepped out in crisp jeans and a city-slick haircut that still didn't fit the dirt on his boots. "Still obsessed with that horse, huh?" Ryan asked, slamming the truck door. "Yep," Cliff answered without looking. "It ain't been tamed yet." Ryan came inside and dropped into the chair across from him. "Dad, I've told you, Sundown Hollow needs a new direction. The purebred training model is dead. We could sell off part of the land, open a resort, maybe even a riding school. There's a whole market out there." Cliff squinted. "So kids can paint their faces and pose on ponies for pictures?" "So we can survive," Ryan said gently. "I don't want to see you end up like Grandpa, selling the land piece by piece just to hang on." Cliff set his glass down. "You think I'm that weak?" "I think that horse is bleeding you dry. A little more each day." The silence between them stretched long enough to hear the wind whistle through the old wood window frames. Finally, Cliff stood. "If no one can tame that horse, then the world's gonna know it." Ryan raised a brow. "What do you mean?" Cliff pulled out a drawer and grabbed a blank sheet of paper. He began writing in bold strokes. "A wager. A public challenge. Anyone who can stay on Midnight Dust for more than 60 seconds wins 10 grand and one of my best breeding mares." Ryan blinked. "You serious?" "Dead serious. And you're handling the publicity. Call the streamers, local stations, and every cowboy group in the West. I want this known across the state." "You're turning it into a circus?" "No," Cliff said. Voice iron. "I'm making it a legend." 3 days later, word had spread like wildfire, from Amarillo to Lubbock, all the way to Santa Fe. Horse forums buzzed with excitement. Sundown Hollow Ranch issues once-in-a-lifetime challenge. Old Man Redmond dares the world. Bo Miller, Cliff's longtime rival and nosy neighbor, couldn't resist. He leaned against the old fence, calling out as Cliff adjusted a fence post. "Heard you're betting your reputation on that devil horse, Cliff." Cliff looked up, eyes like cold steel. "Heard you're about to lose again," Bo laughed. "I bet you'll end up kneeling before your own beast." Cliff turned back to his work without a word. But something inside him winced. That evening, as the sun dipped low and threw golden fire across the dusty land, Cliff stood alone in the yard, right where his late wife once hosted their spring dances a decade ago. Wind whispered through the worn wooden beams, carrying old memories on its breath. He looked to the sky. "Darlin'," he whispered, "they're gonna ride my pain like a sideshow, but if you were still here, you'd understand why I have to do this." Out in the corral, the black horse stood with its back to him, its shadow long and jagged, like a scar across the heart of Texas. 3 weeks after Cliff Redmond's explosive announcement, Sundown Hollow Ranch had become the eye of a storm. Before sunrise, trucks, horse trailers, vendor tents, and news vans lined the dusty road leading to the ranch. Each morning began with the sound of a local brass band warming up, cowbells clinking from food stalls, the smell of smoked brisket hanging in the air, and the restless hum of nearly 1,000 people who had come to witness what seemed impossible: someone staying on midnight dust. The old training arena had been transformed into a rugged, yet striking competition ring. Reinforced wood and steel rails surrounded the space with overhead cameras, local TV crews, and drones circling like hawks. Painted in bold red letters on the main gate was the challenge: midnight dust. 60 seconds or a broken bone. Cliff stood atop an old pickup truck that had been refitted into a judging platform. He leaned on a hand-carved walnut cane, one he'd whittled himself back in 1985. Dressed in a clean white shirt, dusty jeans, and a deep red neckerchief, the color he reserved for only the most serious occasions, he scanned the chaotic crowd below. People screamed bets, waved flags, and cheered like it was a bullfight in El Paso. Ryan was running logistics near the makeshift backstage, pacing with a walkie-talkie, scowling at the unstable livestream connection. "We've got almost 20,000 watching online," he muttered. "And if someone gets killed out there, we're toast." Cliff didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the main corral where midnight dust stood like a fortress of muscle and storm. The horse didn't rage, it didn't pace, but it also didn't bow. Its coal black eyes, lit by a streak of white lightning on its forehead, scanned the arena as if it were the one choosing its next victim. "That old man's lost his mind," a news anchor from Albuquerque mumbled, aiming her camera at the pit. "But folks love crazy." The loudspeaker blared, "First challenger up." The crowd erupted. The first rider was a well-known horseman from Santa Fe, Tony Delgado. Tall, broad-shouldered, a legend for his grip and steely stare. He walked confidently into the ring to deafening applause. Cliff watched him closely as Tony approached midnight dust. He carried no whip, no saddle, just a soft rope bridle looped at his side. Midnight dust didn't flinch. Its ears twitched forward, muscles tensing under its obsidian coat. The moment Tony reached out to lay a hand on its shoulder, the beast exploded. With a spin like a dust devil, midnight dust bucked Tony straight into the wooden rail. The impact sounded like thunder. Tony didn't move. His back lay twisted at an unnatural angle. The crowd gasped, half horrified, half thrilled. 7 seconds, Ryan muttered, staring at the stopwatch, still undefeated. The second, third, and fourth challengers, all seasoned cowboys, were thrown, dragged, kicked, or retreated before even touching the reins. Each fall sent the audience into a frenzy, howling like wolves drunk on adrenaline and dust. Ryan passed behind Cliff, shaking his head. "You really think this stunt is going to restore your reputation, or are we just feeding the media a punchline?" Cliff didn't respond, but his grip on the cane tightened. Sweat rolled down his collar, not from heat, but from pride, and from a beast as stubborn as himself. The fifth challenger stepped up. Jess Carter, 48, a seasoned horsewoman from Oklahoma, known for taming wild Mustangs with a wooden flute. She moved like wind, nodded to the crowd, and pulled a carved flute from her leather pouch. When she played, the tune drifted like wind brushing tall grass, soft, strange, ancient. Midnight dust tilted its head. No fury, no surrender either. Jess stepped closer, slowly raising a hand toward the horse's neck. And then, like a thunderclap on cracked earth, midnight dust spun and kicked with both hind legs. Jess dodged but fell hard. The flute flew across the ring and split in two. The crowd clapped, uncertain if it was applause for effort or failure. Cliff sighed. "No one," he muttered. "No one." His gaze shifted to a wooden chair he'd placed years ago for his wife. No one had dared sit in it since she passed. It sat empty, framed in sunset light, its shadow stretching like the memory of a love that never faded. Then a sound broke through the crowd, boots tapping across wood and a female voice clear and steady. "I want to try." Cliff's head snapped up, the crowd parted. A young woman with braided hair, a worn denim shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat stepped calmly into the arena. The silence was deafening, no reins, no saddle, just her. And that look in her eyes. Cliff squinted. He didn't know her name, but something in her presence stirred a memory long buried, of a time when people believed horses weren't meant to be broken, but heard. "I want to try." The words cut through the arena like a fresh wind through dust. For a moment, over 1,000 people fell silent. Even the sound of vendors shouting, fans humming, and horses breathing seemed to stop, caught in the stillness those 4 soft-spoken words had created. Cliff narrowed his eyes, following the voice to where the crowd had begun to part, like a river opening before something ancient and undeniable. A girl was walking forward. She wore a faded denim shirt, straight-legged jeans tucked into scuffed leather boots, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed most of her sun-touched face. Her thick black hair was tied in a single long braid, draped over one shoulder, bound at the end with a strip of red leather. But what held everyone captive wasn't her clothes, it was her eyes. Steel gray, mountain deep, locked straight onto Cliff, unblinking. Ryan was the first to speak. "Who are you?" The girl nodded politely. "My name is Callie Rose Hartley. I'm from Montana." Cliff turned slightly to Ryan, who shrugged. "She's not on the registration list." Callie said nothing more. She calmly removed her hat, revealing a face shaped by sun, silence, and open skies. No makeup, no polish, just honesty. She handed the hat to a little girl in the front row, then began walking toward the gate. A man in the crowd laughed. "She wants to ride the Reaper?" Another whistled. "Somebody get her back to the hot dog stand." The laughter rippled through the crowd like cruel wind, but Callie didn't flinch. She kept walking, unarmed, unworried, eyes never leaving the black horse standing still like a statue carved from thunder. Cliff lowered his voice. "No. If you turn her away now," Ryan whispered, "you'll have 100 people saying you're scared of a girl." Cliff exhaled hard. "What if it tramples her?" "Then we pray," Ryan said, "and keep the lawyers on speed dial." Cliff gritted his teeth and called out, "Miss Hartley, you accept full responsibility for your actions. I am not liable if that horse—" "I do," Callie said, her voice not loud but cutting through the air. "I take full responsibility." Cliff gave a tight nod. He signaled Wyatt to open the gate. The creak of the old hinges stretched like a question no one wanted to answer. Callie stepped inside. Midnight dust turned its head. It didn't spook. But unlike with the others, Callie didn't approach head-on. She moved in a wide arc, her steps slow and deliberate, as if she were measuring the earth itself. The arena went silent. Then Callie began to sing. No one recognized the language. It wasn't English. It wasn't Spanish. It was a stream of old rolling tones, gentle as wind through pine, soft as water finding stone. Some would later say it was a Cherokee lullaby, a song once used to calm wild horses long before fences cut the land. Midnight dust flicked an ear. Its muscles tensed, but it didn't move away. A breeze slipped through the arena. Callie's hair lifted. Her voice kept flowing, steady like a heart-beaten song. "Why isn't she looking at it?" Ryan whispered. "Because staring is a challenge," Cliff murmured. "She's inviting, not commanding." Callie continued her wide circle, slow and sacred, like she was drawing an old ritual in the dust. When only a few feet remained between her and the horse, she stopped. She extended her left hand, palm open, no more. Midnight dust huffed, dust rose. Another step, the horse tilted its head. Another step. And then, as if unlocking something ancient, midnight dust stepped forward, once, then again. Its muzzle touched her palm. A wave of breath washed through the crowd, like an entire stadium exhaling in awe. Cliff didn't move. Callie didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes, placed her other hand gently on the horse's neck, and whispered something no one could hear. Midnight dust stood still, head slightly bowed. This was not submission. This was a meeting. Ryan stared. It's never let anyone near it like that. No one cheered, no one clapped. They were witnessing something holy, not born of dominance, but of presence. A soul meeting another soul. Callie stepped to the side, one hand still resting lightly on the horse's side. Then, in a smooth, effortless motion, she mounted it. No saddle, no reins, no rope. Midnight Dust didn't flinch, didn't buck, didn't snort. It simply let out a long breath as if saying, finally, someone who listens. Callie sat tall. The crowd still dared not make a sound. She tapped her heel gently against the horse's side. Midnight Dust began to walk. Not a charge, not a kick, just one slow, even circle, as if writing a word on the earth in trust. One lap, then another, then a third. Cliff's hand tightened on the cane. Callie guided Midnight Dust to the platform where Cliff stood. She looked up, not with defiance, but a profound understanding. "Mr. Redmond," she said, voice steady as when she entered, "your horse isn't wild. He's unheard." Then she bowed. Midnight Dust bowed with her. In that moment, beneath the Texas sunset, where folks once believed a horse had to be broken to be useful, a young woman brought an entire land to silence with a whisper. The moon rose early over Sundown Hollow that night. Its silver light swept across the old ranch house roof, curled around the ancient trees, and settled softly on the back of Midnight Dust, who now stood still in the yard like a living monument. The breeze smelled of dry grass and road dust, laced with the echo of something that had just shifted. In the kitchen, Cliff stood with his back to the window, holding a cup of now cold black tea. Ryan sat at the table, flipping through a stack of quickly printed papers. On top, in bold type, it read, "Administrative Records, Hartley Callie Rose." "Real name. Real documents," Ryan said in a low voice. "Born in northern Montana. Dropped out after 8th grade. No Facebook, no Instagram, no current medical records." Cliff turned, his eyes dark as moonlit stone. "Then how's she been living?" "She lived with her grandfather, Amos Hartley, one of the last Cherokee elders in the Bitterroot Mountains. He used to rescue wild Mustangs from kill pens, rehab them." Ryan looked up. "You know what's the strangest part?" Cliff raised the cup, but didn't sip. "She has no license, no official training, but between 2016 and 2021, she rescued over 20 abused or abandoned Mustangs. There's even a piece in a local magazine. Some young reporter called her the Snow Whisperer. Everyone in the mountains knows her name." Cliff sat down in his old wooden chair slowly, like lowering a burden. "You think she's real?" "Real enough to give you chills," Ryan whispered. The next morning, Callie wasn't at the barn. No one knew where she'd gone. Around 8 a.m., Wyatt spotted her sitting on the northern ridge, next to a crescent-shaped rock, eyes fixed on the distant mountain range. Beside her lay a weathered leather-bound notebook. Cliff decided to go. He didn't tell anyone. Climbing was slow. His old knee fought every step. When he finally reached her, Callie didn't look back. "Ever wonder," she said, her voice calm and low, "if you ever killed a horse that didn't need to die?" Cliff stopped behind her, silent. "You know Black Hollow Training Center?" she asked, handing him the notebook. The first page was a rough sketch, a horse tied to a post, back covered in whip marks. Cliff clenched the edge of the book. "Nevada? 10 years ago?" She nodded. "They sold off horses that wouldn't cooperate, used cattle prods, blades, sedatives, just to break them." She turned toward him. Midnight Dust was there. Took a bullet in the hip trying to escape. That scar, it's still visible. Cliff didn't speak. That batch of horses got scattered across the country. Some were bought, others disappeared. "I remember that lot," Cliff said, barely audible. "I turned them down, was told they weren't salvageable." Callie didn't judge, but her gaze cut sharper than any frost wind. "He escaped, spent 3 years wild, untouched by human hands, until yesterday." Cliff exhaled. "Why you? Why'd he let you in?" Callie smiled, soft, almost sad. "Because I didn't walk in to fix him. I walked in to listen." That afternoon, Ryan and Cliff stood inside the barn. Midnight Dust was calmly chewing hay, eyes half closed like a child learning to sleep again. "I thought I had to break him," Cliff said. Ryan looked at his father. "You're not the first to think that. But I'm the only one who brought him home. Or maybe, the only one he needed forgiveness from." They both stood in silence for a long time. That evening, Callie brought Midnight Dust out into the yard again. No audience, no live stream, just Cliff, Ryan, and a handful of staff. She sang the same lullaby, this time barely louder than a breath. She didn't ride. She walked beside him, step for step, like two spirits learning to share one road. Cliff watched, heart pounding like it hadn't rested in decades. Later, he returned to the house and unlocked a drawer that hadn't been touched in years. Inside was a handwritten letter from his late wife, given to him before she passed. One line read, "If one day you find yourself powerless before a wild creature, don't try to cage it. Learn to stand beside it. What you don't understand may be exactly what you need." Cliff folded the letter with trembling hands. Outside, midnight dust's hooves thudded softly on dry grass. No whip, no rope, only music and understanding. Night at Sundown Hollow was quiet enough to hear the wind threading through tin roof seams and crickets whispering beneath the yucca shrubs. The moonlight shimmered off the back porch's old wooden planks, where Cliff Redmond sat beside Callie Hartley, each with a steaming mug of peppermint tea from the little garden out back. Neither spoke for the first few minutes. Only the soft flicker of an oil lantern, the distant snort of midnight dust from the barn, and the gentle popping of pine logs in the stove filled the silence. Cliff glanced at Callie. The young woman was as still as mountain air. Her hair was down, catching the moonlight in silvery strands. Her face, bare of makeup or pretense, showed the sun-scarred marks of years lived outdoors among freedom and pain. "I used to think," Cliff began, his voice husky, "that a horse just needed to know who the boss was." Callie smiled. "And now?" "Now I'm not sure I've ever really owned anything at all." She set her cup down gently and turned toward him. "Have you ever just stood beside a horse? Not training, not controlling, just being?" Cliff thought for a long moment. "Once, the day I met her, my wife." Callie didn't reply. She waited. Cliff leaned back in his rocking chair. "I was 27, just brought in a few wild horses from Colorado. One had a lame leg. I was ready to tranquilize it so we could trim the hoof. But she, back then just a rookie vet, walked in, grabbed the syringe and said, 'Sit beside him. Put your hand on his shoulder. Wait.' You did it?" "Nope," argued with her for 30 minutes. "And then?" "She won." They both laughed, a soft, knowing laugh, not because it was funny but because it was true and close to the bone. Callie poured more tea. "Midnight Dust doesn't need a handler. He needs someone unafraid of his wildness." Cliff nodded. "Like she was." Silence returned. The wind whistled through the porch beams. "Callie," Cliff said after a pause, "are you staying?" She tilted her head as if asking herself the same. "I'm not staying to train your horses," she said. "I'm staying to help you learn how to listen to them." Cliff nodded slowly. "Then stay." The next morning, Cliff and Callie walked to the barn. No camera crew, no audience, no handlers, just an old man, a young woman, and a horse that had once terrified a state. Midnight Dust stood basking in the morning sun. Dew still clung to his dark back. His ears flicked gently when they approached. Cliff stopped 3 meters away. "He remembers I tried to break him," he said quietly. Callie nodded. "He remembers. But horses don't hold grudges. They just don't forget." Cliff raised his hand, slowly, cautiously. Midnight Dust didn't move, didn't step back. 1 breath. 2. And for the first time since arriving at Sundown Hollow, Cliff Redmond touched the horse's neck without being thrown. Midnight Dust tilted his head, not in submission but in permission. Cliff froze. His fingers trembled, resting against the thick, warm coat. He didn't look at Callie, but he whispered, "I'm sorry." The horse sighed. That afternoon, Cliff had the old sign outside the barn taken down. It once read, "Ride or Die Ranch." By evening, a new wooden sign stood in its place, hand-carved by locals. "Sundown Hollow, Wild Mustang Sanctuary and Connection Center." Ryan stood reading it, chuckling. "Bit long for a slogan." "Better than Tame It or Break Your Back," Cliff replied. As they walked toward the house, they spotted Callie leading a young chestnut foal out of the pen. It followed her like a shadow. "Whose is that one?" Ryan asked. Callie stroked its mane. "The future's." That night, Cliff sat on the porch again. No Ryan. No Callie. Just him. And the old photo of his wife resting on a side table. "Darlin'," he whispered, "I thought I had to be strong to keep this land together. But maybe what I lacked all along was the strength to do nothing but stay still." Somewhere in the dark, Midnight Dust whinnied softly. The wind carried a gentle hum, like a lullaby from a people long gone, still alive in the hearts of wild horses, and those quiet enough to listen. A week after the historic moment at Sundown Hollow Ranch, the crowds had cleared, the cameras packed away, and the headlines moved on to newer distractions. But out on the edge of the Texas plains, where the wind still smelled of dust and life, something was quietly changing. Not loud, not dramatic, just like the sunset easing behind the horizon, slow and forever. Callie Hartley didn't leave. She started her mornings cleaning troughs, trimming hooves on an arthritic old gelding, and sitting silently beside a skittish colt who wouldn't eat. Just sitting, saying nothing, offering no pressure. Ryan Redmond watched with quiet disbelief. He'd never seen anyone work with horses like that. You don't use ropes, don't give commands, don't train. So what do? Callie shrugged. I make friends. Ryan laughed. My friends don't lick my face after I wash my hair. Then maybe you've never had a real friend who was a horse. That evening, Callie asked for a formal conversation in the main kitchen. Cliff, Ryan, and old Smokey the cat, who needed no invitation, were all present. Smokey had already made himself at home on the table. Callie rolled out a hand-drawn map across the wood surface. It was a layout of a Mustang sanctuary, with wide-open pastures divided by living fences, not barbed wire. Native grasses, open barns, a small learning center for guests. What is this? Cliff asked, narrowing his eyes. This, Callie said, is the future of Sundown Hollow. I didn't come here to turn your ranch into another training facility. I came to help you turn it into a place for healing. Not just for horses, but for people too. Ryan leaned in. A wild Mustang sanctuary? Callie nodded. Cliff stared at the drawing. And how many people do you think will come here to befriend a horse? As long as there are people looking to find themselves again in the eyes of something wild, they'll come. Ryan stood and pulled out a folder. I've already contacted the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. They have grants for programs that combine wildlife rescue and education. We can apply to fund Phase 1. Cliff remained silent. He looked up at the old photo on the wall, him and his wife in their younger days, standing with a dapple gray mare between them. She once told him, if you can't earn a horse's trust with kindness, you don't deserve to lead it with rope. He turned back to Callie. Where do we start? The next morning, the old ranch signs came down. Cliff himself sawed through each weathered board, laying them gently in the back of his pickup. Meanwhile, Ryan and a few neighbors helped raise a new one. Sundown Hollow, Wild Mustang Sanctuary and Human Horse Connection Center. The local news returned. Footage of Midnight Dust walking beside Callie without reins replayed on half a dozen networks. One segment titled it, The Girl and the Untamable Horse, Together They Tamed Texas. Right then, Bo Miller showed up. His black SUV rolled into the lot like a ghost from the past. Bo stepped out, hands in his pockets, strutting as always. He glanced at the new sign, then looked at Cliff. Last time I was here, Bo said, you were betting your pride on that demon horse. Now you've got summer camp for horses? Cliff didn't respond. He simply pulled out his phone, tapped play on a short clip. It was Callie, singing softly in the stall. Midnight Dust stepped toward her, pressed its forehead gently to her chest, and stilled. Bo watched, didn't speak. He turned back toward his car, paused before getting in. Still not looking at Cliff, he said, not everyone has the guts to spend their whole life learning how to just stand still. And then he left. A month later, the sanctuary officially opened. The first visitor was a retired soldier from Amarillo, battling PTSD from Afghanistan. The second was a 73-year-old widow, hoping to ease her grief by brushing down a gentle mare. The third was an 11-year-old autistic boy, silent all day until Midnight Dust lowered its head and pressed its brow to the boy's sketchbook. Cliff watched it all, saying nothing. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel hollow when he watched the sun set behind the western fence line. Ryan said, See, Dad, she was right. This ranch doesn't have to conquer horses to survive. Callie smiled. And Midnight Dust was never broken. He just chose to stay. Cliff looked at Callie, then out at the herd running freely beneath the falling sun. I think it's time I learned to stay too. Mornings at Sundown Hollow Ranch had taken on a new kind of quiet since it became a Mustang sanctuary. Gone were the sounds of cracking whips and shouted commands. Gone was the dust stirred by show-riding drills. In their place came the soft rhythm of hooves brushing dry earth, the rustling of grass in the wind, and somewhere on the back porch, the steady hum of an old wooden guitar. Callie Hartley was still there. She lived in the same room that once belonged to Mrs. Redmond. The walls remained lined with black and white photos of horses, an old straw hat, and a string of handmade wooden beads. Callie changed almost nothing, except to add a wicker basket beneath the bed. now filled with handwritten letters from children who had come to the ranch, each thanking her for something no classroom had ever taught. Midnight Dust hadn't changed either. No one rode him. No one tried. He wasn't bred, tethered, or caged. He was a living symbol, calm, mysterious, and completely free. And that freedom made him more captivating than any paper-pedigreed stallion in Texas. People came from all over just to see him, from a distance, to watch him crest the ridge at sunrise or tear across the plains at dusk. That fall morning, Cliff Redmond sat on the porch's creaking rocker. His coffee had gone cold, but he didn't mind. His eyes followed every small motion in the yard. Ryan kneeling to show a child how to stand still beside a skittish mare. Callie sitting at the steps, her fingers gently coaxing a tune from her guitar. Midnight Comes for No One, the same song that had rewritten everything. He inhaled deeply. The scent of fallen leaves and cool wind filled his lungs. His back still ached, his knee still limped, but something inside him had softened. "Mr. Cliff?" Callie called gently, still plucking at the strings. "Do you know where this song comes from?" He shook his head. "My grandmother taught it to me. She was Cherokee. Said it's a song to call back wandering spirits across the prairie. Not to tame them, but to remind them they're still remembered." Cliff smiled faintly, murmuring into the breeze. "And sometimes those spirits aren't gone. They just forgot how to listen." That afternoon, a school group from Dallas came to visit the sanctuary. The kids chattered and giggled, some sketching horses, some recording whinnies for science projects. One girl, maybe 8 years old, wild curly hair and thick glasses, walked slowly to the fence where Midnight Dust often stood. Callie watched quietly from afar. The stallion noticed her too. He didn't approach. He didn't retreat. He simply saw her. The little girl held out a slice of apple. Her hand trembled slightly, but stayed firm. Midnight Dust extended his neck, then stopped, just a few steps away. He didn't take the apple, didn't break eye contact. The girl grinned, glowing. Callie turned to a guide nearby and said softly, "That's how it begins. You don't have to ride them. You just have to stand in front of them, with a heart that doesn't need control." That evening, Ryan typed up a proposal to submit Sundown Hollow Ranch to a national animal welfare organization as a model site for human-wildlife connection education. He hit send, smiling, just as his father walked slowly in from the barn. Cliff didn't say a word. He took off his hat, wiped his brow, and walked past Ryan, pausing only to pat his son's shoulder. "For the first time in years, I'm proud of you," he said quietly. Ryan froze. He turned to respond, but Cliff had already moved toward the porch, where Callie was softly playing that same old tune. Cliff sat in his chair, closed his eyes, and simply listened. The guitar, the breeze, the horses somewhere in the distance. It was all one song now, neither sad nor triumphant, just whole. Just human. Callie sang gently. "Midnight doesn't wait for the brave or the broken. It comes with the wind, silent and golden." Cliff whispered, not to her, not even to himself, but to the land, to the life he had once tried to control. "I used to think I won when a horse bowed its head. Turns out, I truly won when I learned to bow mine." And out across the ridge, a band of wild horses ran beneath a rising sliver of moon. The wind swept through the tall grass, carrying a girl's voice and the soul of a land that had finally learned to listen. Dear friend, if you've stayed with us until this final moment of the story, then maybe, somewhere in your heart, you too cherish wild spirits like Callie, like Midnight Dust, like the wind-swept land of Sundown Hollow. Just leave a simple comment below. Type 1 if you believe a wild horse doesn't need to be ridden to be beautiful, or 0 if you want to hear more heartfelt stories like this one. And don't forget to subscribe to True Animal Stories so you won't miss the next story that just might quietly touch your soul in the most human way possible.